Hi quilting friends, this is Janae King and welcome to month number 5 of Cabin by the Lake at Whitlock Sewing and Vac in Salem, Oregon. And today we are going to be talking about the sun. And first off, I want to go over what you should find in your kits this month. So first of all, you should have a piece of white, and it's just one print for all of your white background. You will also have a piece of orange, and this is for your sun points. And then you will have 4 5-inch squares, 2 of this print and 2 of this print. You will also have your pattern. You will also have several sheets of the templates for the sun. And you will also find month 10 instructions. And you might be wondering what in the world I'm doing including month 10 in your kit this month. And I'm including that because those are instructions for how to put the top half of your quilt together. So if you're very anxious to put all of the blocks together and get the top half of the quilt made, like I have done right here, then I've included those instructions for you today. One of the things that really helps when you're putting all the blocks together is this sheet, which you should have gotten in a previous kit. And you can see that it's got dark lines on it, and those dark lines are to indicate that that section is to be sewn together, and then you'll sew another section together with the dark lines. And then eventually you will sew all of those sections together. But this just really helps so you can see which ones that the pattern is saying to put together. In your kit, you will also find a piece of butcher paper. And butcher paper is used in quilting to make template pieces out of it. And then the cool thing about butcher paper is it sticks to fabric when you iron it on. So it makes cutting out shapes super easy, and I think it's kind of cool that it sticks to the fabric. So I'm going to show you later how to use butcher paper. One of the things that you're going to want to note about your white background fabric is when you go to start cutting that fabric, you are going to want to cut 2 2-inch strips by the width of the fabric right off the bat. You want to make sure that you are reserving 2 2-inch strips by the width of the fabric, which those will later be used for the border that goes all the way around your sun. So if you don't save those the first thing off, it's really easy to not have enough at the end to make those strips. So when you pull out your background fabric, just cut 2 2-inch strips off of that by the width of the fabric, which the width of the fabric is like 40 inches. So make sure you're cutting 2 2-inch strips by the width of the fabric. Set those aside until your block is all put together, and then you'll use those for later. So there's basically 3 ways that you can put the sun together, and I want to talk about those right now. So method number 1 is paper piecing. If you are an expert paper piecer, then I would say go for it. Make the sun using the paper piece method. If you are not a paper piecing like a tongue twister, a paper piecing expert, then one of the things that you could do is Google paper piecing techniques and look those up, check them out. There's several good ones on YouTube, and that will help you learn that process, and then you could give that a try. One of the things about paper piecing is it will help you make very precise points on your sun. So if that's something that's really important to you, then I would say check out the paper piecing method. I am not going to show you the paper piecing method because it's actually not one of my most favorite ways to sew quilt blocks together. So I'm sorry, but I will tell you how I sewed the sun together, and maybe you'll want to go with that method. So method number 2 is super easy, at least I think it is. It would be taking your background fabric, just creating a square, the size that you need. I think it would need to be 14.5 inches big. And you would take some wool felt, cut a circle out of the wool felt, pin it onto your background fabric, and then just stitch around the sun circle. Maybe you use a blanket stitch. Maybe you just use a straight stitch. Whatever you want, just stitch that down. Then you could cut the sun points out of the same fabric, maybe a different color, and stitch those around the sun. They can be same. They could be stitched on straight stitch. They could be blanket stitched on. You could use your sewing machine with a fancy stitch. But that would be a really easy way to put the sun on the background fabric. So I have one more method, and that's the method that I ended up using. And the method that I ended up using was somewhat of an old-fashioned method. I actually took the butcher paper and I traced my template pieces onto the butcher paper. I cut that out, and then I ironed those to fabric, and then I cut out the shapes out of the fabric. I then hand sewed the whole entire sun together. So what that means is I sewed all the little rectangles together. I sewed all the little triangles together. And then I sewed the half circles on. I sewed the outside of the sun block on. And then you're going to actually sew these into 4 sections. Once that was done, I sewed those all together, and then my sun was done. So I don't want that to scare you that I hand pieced it. You could actually sew it by machine if you really wanted to, but the neat thing about hand stitching is when you're sewing something that's round, it gives you some give in seam, and it prevents puckering, and it actually seems to fit better together. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a part 2 video explaining in depth how to cut those templates out of butcher paper and iron them to fabric so that you can see that process. Unfortunately, it might be kind of a long video, but I really just want to explain to you and teach you how to use the old-fashioned method of sewing. I can actually remember when my grandmother was teaching me how to quilt, and she would take cereal boxes and use that to make templates out of, and then we would take the templates made from cereal boxes and lay them on top of the fabric and trace it around with a pencil and cut them out. And those were just such good memories for me, and I love getting back to my roots, I guess you could say, in a way, and doing it kind of the old-fashioned way and using methods that they did a long time ago for quilting work better than the really fast, quick methods that we have today. There's your tip of the day, you could say. Anyway, so I hope you have fun making the sun. It was a challenge for me, but it was such a good feeling when I got it done and it actually laid flat and it looked good. So I was glad that I did it, and I hope that it goes well for you. Leave me comments below. I will answer your questions if you have any, and I just really hope that you have fun sewing this quilt and putting it together. It's been really super fun for me, and I've enjoyed it immensely, and I can't wait to see you in class. I talked about cutting those 2-inch strips by the width of the fabric, and I want to explain a little bit more what you're going to be using those for. So once you finish making your sunblock, the pattern says that your sun should measure 14.5 inches. That's with all of the 4 sections put together. What they want you to do is put a small border around the whole entire sun, and then it should measure 16.5 inches. So what I want you to do is actually sew on to all 4 sides a 2-inch border, which will actually make the sun bigger than 16.5, but then you can cut the sun down. So you want the final measurement of the sun to be 16.5 inches. So when you measure the sunblock all by itself, it should measure 16.5 inches. So you will sew on the 2-inch strips to all 4 sides of the sun, and then you will want to cut that down to 16.5. So I think the pattern says to cut those strips at 1.5 inches. Well, that's great if your 1/4 inch is perfect. But if your 1/4 inch isn't perfect and you want to get that sun to the perfect size, then you need to cut those strips at 2 inches. And then once they're sewn onto the sun, you will just cut the whole thing down to 16.5 inches.